let's go straight into let's just talk about Uematsu for a bit, shall we? So in terms of music theory, Uematsu did not actually go to a music school. He wasn't trained formally in like an educational institute at all. But his music is still like so well done, like you probably wouldn't even know that he didn't go to an actual like college for music. He went to college and majored in English actually. So let's do this. There we go. So this is like a very quick PowerPoint that I made about Uematsu because we're kind of going into his we won't go into One Winged Angel right now. We'll go into the Final Fantasy VII main theme, and then we'll come back to the One Winged Angel. But I do have a little bit of the biography for him. So he was self-taught in piano. He went to Kanagawa University, and he graduated with a degree in English, not even music. Then he was hired at Square Company, and then he met Hironobu Sakaguchi and worked on the Final Fantasy game, and because of that success, he was hired to continue composing up until he left Square in 2004. Now, I'm not sure how many of you know the story behind Final Fantasy, like not the game story, but like the story behind why it's called Final Fantasy. Square wasn't doing too well. They had created a couple other games previously, and they weren't really, Square was like a small company back then, and it wasn't, like those other games that they had made weren't really faring too well in sales and things like that, so that's why they created Final Fantasy, because it was like, here's our last hurrah, if this tanks, then like Square's done. We're basically done as a company. And so Uematsu basically was hired to work on Final Fantasy, the first one, probably knowing that this might just be a one-off, right? That this might not do well at all, which is kind of interesting because Final Fantasy did so well that we have all of the other Final Fantasy games that have come out since then, right? Most recent one is Final Fantasy 15, and so that's kind of funny because it's supposed to be Final Fantasy, and here we are with like 15 Final Fantasies, so kind of cool. Yeah, and let me see if there's... Nope, okay. We're gonna skip that for now, but that's all I have for that. Let me go back into here. It's gonna be a lot of transitions happening. So, let's talk about Final Fantasy VII, because VGM Academy, Dan Holzman, he's like the mastermind behind VGM Academy, he made an article on his website talking about music theory lessons that you can actually take from listening to Final Fantasy VII, specifically the main theme from Final Fantasy VII, which I did a cover of and actually was playing a little bit earlier. So we'll look at that first, because there's a lot of really great stuff that Uematsu does, and then we will go back a little bit into One Winged Angel, because that is like a complete masterpiece in my opinion, and a lot of different references and a lot of good things happening in One Winged Angel that makes it work so well with like the boss that is Sephiroth. So let's first look at this. I'm actually going to put this over on this screen because that's probably what I'll be looking at mostly, is this monitor. So again, this is from Dan Holzman, so a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be reading and we're going to be discussing, it's mostly his words. We're going to skip a bit to lesson 1. And lesson 1, he says, is using intervals in melody writing. Okay? So a great melody is priceless, pretty much, right? You want something that's going to get stuck in your head, that you're going to hum along to, sing along to, something that's easy to do and very memorable. And Final Fantasy VII, the main theme, there it is. Having that interval in there. Let me actually raise my piano a little bit so you can hear it better. There we go. So, we're going to be looking at Final Fantasy VII main theme. That melody is so simple, right? But it's memorable, and it's something that you can definitely hum to. And it's all about balance. This is what Dan says. Writing a balanced melody, right? So you want to have something that has both steps and leaps or skips. And you want to have a balance of the two, right? If you have just... super boring, too boring, right? Or you can do, right? It's just having all these skips is hard to sing, and also not very memorable. So you have to be able to have both of those. You need to have both steps and skips. And so a good thing to do is to figure out the intervals. If you have a melody that you kind of like, how about we, take the intervals that are between, each set of two notes and figure out, is it a step? Is it a skip? Right? And then once you do that, you can kind of at a further glance see, okay, how many steps do I have and how many skips do I have, right? If it's mostly steps and like maybe one skip, you might want to think about changing one to another skip here and there. If you have too many skips, right, then you should probably think about incorporating more steps. Hopefully most of you guys know like interval names, right? Major third, major second, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, right? You guys hopefully kind of understand those interval names. But if you don't know, then there is a video by Ongaku Concept that's like 8 minutes long. That might be a good like introduction for that. But basically, what we want to do is have a melody that contains mostly stepwise motion, right? So let me go back into here. So you see these red lines. Again, this is from Video Game VGM Academy on his website. So the red lines are steps. The blue lines or curves are the leaps or skips. So you can see it's mostly steps, but there are 3 leaps in here. So again, it does kind of help it stand out a bit and not make it super monotonous and boring. So it creates a contrast, right? Using a balance of mostly stepwise and then a few really well-placed leaps or skips. And he said if you wrote a melody that only used steps, it'd be boring and predictable. But if you use a melody that only used skips, it'd be less appealing because your ears would not be able to follow that leap all the time as the melody would jump up and down. So it's definitely a balancing act for this. So this one, we're talking about the, right, the main theme. So this interval, right, it kind of outlines this interval, right, which is basically this central thing, the 7th, the major 7th, right? And it sounds so beautiful, though, when you actually have it in the context of the melody. When you just do, it's not the prettiest thing, right? But, right? That sounds really beautiful. So he knew how to separate and add notes in, like in between the interval to make it sound a little less like clashy, and it was super tasteful what he did here. So what we do is basically take this idea whenever you're composing or even arranging, because sometimes when I arrange, I change the melody a little bit here and there, right? To better suit some chords if I did some reharmonization. So I need to kind of know what intervals I'm playing with, like what exactly I need to do. Make sure the melody still is memorable, right? It's still like Shala's theme, right? But the melody's just a little bit different because I added like another step or added another skip somewhere. Yes, leap followed by step in the opposite direction. Yes, right? That's kind of what you have to do. If you have a large leap, right? So it goes from the G sharp to the D sharp, up, and then you always want to step the opposite direction. And he does, step downward, right? Same thing here, right? Between the G sharp and the B, he goes to the A, down to the A after the skip up. That's a very good technique that just like pretty much anyone will tell you to do. If you make a leap, you almost always want to do stepwise in the opposite direction, just to kind of balance out that huge leap you just did. So, very good. Glad you talked and like said that, Basidify. Next, though, because there are like 7 lessons in this article, Again, this is taken from VGM Academy. This is not my own work, but we're going to kind of discuss it a bit, right? So, basics of keys, scales, and which chords to use. Yeah. Okay. So, this is kind of self-explanatory. You need to know what key you're in, right? You need to know the tonality, what is going to be your root, what is going to be your tonic center, and you need to make sure you go back to the tonic center, you know, often enough so people know, okay, that's the key, right? That's what we're in. That's the note. So he says, if I'm writing a piece in the key of A major, I know A is the root or home pitch of the piece, and the A major chord is the tonic or the home chord, right? So usually it starts with, like, if we're going to be in A major, it'll start with A major, usually end in A major, right? And anything you do in between there is just going to be kind of fluff, right? But it's got to be pretty fluff that you do. But pretty much you almost always want to start and end on that key or that note chord that you want to have your key in. So this one in the theme, the majority of the piece is in E major, okay? Which you can kind of hear, right? I don't have a big enough keyboard, but let me do. Yeah, you have E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E, right? And you can build all these chords based on those pitches, right? Which we've kind of done in previous music theory lessons, right? I think we basically usually stuck with C major, right? So you have, you know, if you have something on F, right, in the F in the melody, then you can use 3 chords in C major key that also has the F in it, right? So if I have an F in the melody, I could harmonize it with a D minor, an F major, right? Or I can do, yeah, B diminished. So those are the 3 chords that I can use if I have an F in the melody. So kind of same thing here. So we're in E major. These are all the different chords you could use, right? And if you have a certain note in the melody, you usually want to have that same pitch in one of those chords, right? In that chord that you're going to use to harmonize. The most memorable section, he does basically stick to the E major scale, the chords that are in the E major scale. But there is some other things that he does that I absolutely love, because he doesn't stay in E major, or he doesn't limit himself to those chords in the E major scale the entire time. And that's actually a really good thing to do because, again, it sets him apart. It sets that melody apart from other melodies. You know, just adding some things that are interesting that, you know, are not part of the original E major scale. And then it makes the listener go, oh, I liked that chord. What was that chord? That sounded really cool, right? If you stick to E major the entire time, it's probably going to get a little boring. So, yeah, he does mostly, though, stick to the E major scale. So he definitely understands theory and understands chord progressions and just those kinds of harmonization. He definitely understands that even without having formal training. So next lesson is cadences. Okay, hopefully you guys understand what cadence is. So thank God that there's some YouTube videos here. So let's just play this. I'm only going to be able to play it once, unfortunately, but... Right? So that's, oh no, that's an authentic cadence. Okay? So that chord right there, let's actually do some theory. So we have F sharp, A, C sharp, and then we have this G sharp. Right? So technically, this note right here is a non-chord tone, right? And because it goes to, which is F sharp. So G sharp goes down to F sharp, and F sharp is part of this chord, right? So that's non-chord tone, G sharp. Right? This is sounds like a 5/7 chord of some sort. well, not 5/7, but a 7th chord. And then, there we go. And that is B major, which is a 5 to the E. Basically 6, 5, 7 to 1, pretty much, is that cadence that he does. And the cadence is authentic because it goes from a 5 to a 1. Yes, authentic cadence is dominant to tonic. And you have imperfect authentic cadence, and then you have perfect authentic cadence. Imperfect authentic cadence would be like... and then like... So the imperfect is if the melody does not, like the right hand or whatever, the melody does not end on the root or the tonic. So that would be imperfect. But because he ended on that E and we're in E major, then it becomes perfect authentic cadence. Heck yeah. So that's one type of cadence. Okay, we have authentic cadence. Next one is the deceptive cadence. Now, deceptive cadence is when you have like a 1, right? So 4, then you have 5. And then instead of going back from the 5 to the 1 again, you go to the 6. There it is. Right? And he uses a deceptive cadence as well. So you're expecting to hear that 1 again, but then instead you get that. And I love deceptive cadences so much. So it goes from the 5 to the minor 6 instead of the major 1. Yeah, this is what Dan says. Not only are they tricked, but they are tricked and left to wallow in a minor chord instead of a happy, resolute major chord. Mwahaha. So I can definitely see that because, again, you're just like expecting to hear that happy, you know, major tonic chord, and then it throws you into something else. So let's listen to this. Right there. So let me actually, this is in a different key though now. It's not an E major anymore. Because Uematsu doesn't do the deceptive cadence when it's an E major. When he modulates, he does the deceptive cadence at the end. So you're like, whoa, what? I thought we were going to be like, you know, done with the song. And nope, we're not done yet because we went to the 6. So let me try to read bass clef for a sec. Right? And then it goes to... yeah, right there. And you're thinking like, oh, it's gonna go to... right? But no. Instead. So it goes to the E minor instead of going to G major. Yeah, exactly. Basunify's got it right. Because, like, the 4 is supposed to be subdominant, right? The 4 is supposed to actually lead to the dominant. So if you go back to the 4 from the dominant, it doesn't actually give you a resolution. Whereas the 6 still gives you that sense of a resolution. It's just a very different type of resolution than what you were expecting. Ostinato, or ostinati for plural, or ostinatos, I guess. So, does anyone know what an ostinato is? I'm curious. Does anyone know? I have a couple examples that I could play right off the bat for you. Okay, so ostinato is a repeated pattern, or like a phrase that repeats itself throughout a piece of music, right? So, if you guys know Octopath Traveler, yeah, maybe? There's a track that I want to cover, and I sort of half covered, but basically, the very beginning is an ostinato. Tortellini shells. Awesome name. Thank you for the follow. But yeah. Like what I'm doing with the right hand is an ostinato. It's just the same phrase that repeats over and over and over again, right? Same thing with Shala's theme. There we go, yeah. Basically, like Shala's theme has an ostinato as well. Yeah, it's something that's like, just you hear it throughout the entire piece, and it's just something that's repeated the entire time. A lot of video game music actually utilizes this like ostinato type thing, and they're so useful because they can act as an anchor for the listener while simultaneously like adding more and more stuff and like just kind of driving and like just trying to have the listener have this journey throughout the entire piece, starting with something that they get used to hearing, and then just add another layer of something else, add another layer of something else, and this thing's still going kind of thing. And it's just like super easy to have the listener, kind of, what's the word? I guess get used to the new stuff that happens because they have this underlying pattern that we're like, okay, I understand that pattern. Cool. So that stays the same. So we can add whatever the heck we want here later on because that pattern still stays there. So. Took me a bit. Yeah, that's also, I consider that an ostinato as well. That's something that actually is also in the main theme. So let's listen. Right? That is... That stays like the entire time for that section of the main theme. So that would be considered an ostinato. This is what Dan says again. Many Angels, thank you for the follow. Not only does that little phrase reinforce the fact that we're in a minor key, right? So that is... so low. Right, so let me go up an octave there. So it stays in those same pitches throughout most of that section, specifically to like reinforce that E minor chord, right? Which is minor 1 chord now, right? We don't have that G major anymore. So now we're in minor, E minor. So we've kind of, throughout the piece, he basically modulates to the parallel minor from E major to E minor. Dan Holzman says that in addition to reinforcing that new like tonal center and that new key, it creates tension throughout the section as the ostinato continues to reinforce the E minor chord when the rest of the music, right, is like throwing in random crunchy chords. So let's listen to this a bit. Right? Can you hear it? Right? So it's got... I don't have my keyboard's not long enough. So we have... What is that? Oh, I don't have the C sharp. F sharp, A sharp. Right? Those chords don't go together. But he somehow makes it work because this ostinato, right, creates that tension that we want, right, based on what happens when we're like watching the cutscene and stuff and like listening to the main theme. There's some tension there, and he does a really good job at actually like portraying that in the music. Yeah, let's move on to the next lesson, which is my favorite, borrowed chords. Okay, so I taught you guys about borrowed chords, right? It's a chord that's not from the original key. It's borrowed, right, or taken from, usually could be the parallel minor major, or yeah, that's basically usually where it comes from. But it can also be borrowed from like any other key, really, that has some sort of relation to that tonic. So one example that I did, also from Final Fantasy VII. What is it? Right? That second chord is a borrowed chord because it's a minor 4. We're in F major. And then we have a... Oh, sorry. Right? Usually you have... Right? For the regular 4. But instead we have 1 to the minor 4. Which is taken from the parallel minor, F minor. Right? So Uematsu does that in Tifa's theme. But yeah, so that's basically what a borrowed chord is. It's a chord that's not from the key that we're in, but it's taken, just temporarily borrowed, and again, it creates that sense of, ooh, what is that? I wasn't expecting that, right? So a lot of it uses chords from the parallel, right? Parallel major, parallel minor. I think because of that, that makes it a little bit easier to use that minor 4 borrowed chord. So, yeah, let's listen to this. Okay, so I'm gonna actually do this so you can actually see it. Okay. Okay, now this one. So the flat 6, 7. Oh yeah, it's got a sevens in there, but I just did the regular flat 6. So flat 6 chord and flat 7 chord. They're major 6 and major 7 chords. Those two chords are also borrowed from E minor, right? Right? Here's our flat 6, if you will, or just regular C major, D major, then E minor. But he uses those to basically resolve, and oh man, I freaking love it. Right? Oh, I love it. So yeah, those two chords right there, whenever you have like a flat before it, usually that's an indicator that's a borrowed chord. Because if we were to do regular 6, right, a regular 6 chord from a major, right, it's basically, yeah, you can see my mouse. If I were to do a regular 6 chord, it would be this 6 again, right? Right, that doesn't work, right? So you have to kind of differentiate it from here. Have it uppercase and do a flat, because you see how we've flatted these sharps here, right? So that's why they have it as a flat in front. Da-na. Same here. Da-na. Keep that F sharp there, but so that's an example of borrowed chords right there. Again, taken from the parallel minor. Tifa's theme. Right? That's another borrowed chord, again from the parallel minor, right? Well, F minor in that case for Tifa's. So this melody, if you assume that it was composed before the chord progression, right? So he could have backed himself into a corner and didn't know that borrowing chords was even possible, right? So Like, okay, here's the thing. Here's the thing that I love about Uematsu. Even though he was not formally trained at a college or whatever in music, he still understood theory enough to use borrowed chords, right? Like, if he didn't, right? If he didn't have that knowledge of harmony and just thought, oh, I have to stick to all the chords that are in E major, there's like two possible ways that VGM Academy has here that the actual theme could have sounded. Okay, so let's listen to these. Gross, right? Gross. And here's another example of what that main theme could have sounded like if he did not understand and know about borrowed chords. Right? It just loses that you know, like, right? It sounds so off. I totally agree. So, next lesson is called common tone modulation, because I did talk about how Uematsu modulates in the main theme, right? Because a little bit earlier we were like in E minor, right? G major, E minor. So like he modulated, right? From E major to E minor. So, what's really cool about this is he uses a deceptive cadence first, and that pivots us into the minor key. Yeah, so basically the common tone is basically you have that note in both chords. Even if the chord itself is a completely different chord, not even related to the key, as long as it still has that note in it, then it can work as like a pivot, as an anchor for the modulation. Okay, so I'm going to try to play this. F sharp. Right? We remember this. Oh, why can't I read? Right? And then we go to... Right? Then we have right there, okay? So we had the F sharp, to E major. Now this B is the anchor. Keep doing that. See that B is in that one too. G major has a B. E major has a B. Okay, so let's listen to this. Right there. So I'll show this so you guys can read it. Okay. So that same chord progression that we did earlier, right? It ends on the E major. But then this B, he actually re-articulates the B like, hey, something's coming, right? Prepare yourself. Right? So, again, so effective. Like, I'm so surprised that he was not taught like formally, because the devices and techniques he uses, it's like, how did you come up with that, right? So exactly, what's it gonna be? So yeah, that's just one example. I'm sure he's used common tone modulation multiple times though in other pieces as well. Last lesson that takes the main theme as an example. Common chord modulation. Okay, so basically you transition from the original key into the new key through a chord that occurs in both keys, okay? Common chord modulation, right? Take a chord that's in both keys. We're going to look at the exact same place in the music that we did in lesson 6, okay? But not the version that's found in the original soundtrack. So he actually took the harmonization they did for the Reunion Tracks album. That's like an orchestration of the Final Fantasy VII music. So it's an arrangement that has some extra ear candy, Dan says. One more time. Yeah, so let's look at this here. It basically modulates twice in a sense. Wow. And then so basically we're temporarily in C major. And then we're in so this actually turns into a dominant 7th chord, right? And that's D7. We're D7 right now. And D7 is the dominant 5/7, right? It's the 5/7 of, guess what? G. Like, it's perfect. We go from C, and then we go to D7, then to G. Like, okay, that's, I sang a B, but like, you get it. Yeah, that's another great way to use borrowed chords, right? It's not something that you expected at all. When you're listening to it, you're just thinking, da, 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 right? But then, like, this other chord comes out of nowhere, and you're like, what the heck? Right? Not what I was expecting at all. I hope that was educational for you. I hope it wasn't too difficult to kind of go through it with me. But yeah, just that one track alone, the main theme, has all of those elements in it, right? And because of that, it just, as a cohesive piece, it is so effective and it works so well as, like, in terms of melody writing, right? The intervals that he used, the harmonization, using the borrowed chords to, you know, every so often to have the listener, you know, kind of grab their attention again. Like, oh my gosh, using these common chord modulations, common tone modulation, right? It's absolutely crazy that he did this. This is why I think he's a musical genius, and he will always be my favorite composer ever. So, yeah, awesome. Yeah, thank you guys so much. I'm gonna do, we're gonna go into One Winged Angel a little bit, just because I do have a PowerPoint here.